Well, hi everyone. Thanks for attending my session today. I really appreciate it. I know this is getting at the end of a kind of a long and busy week, so I appreciate you taking the time to come and watch this presentation today. My name is Richard Nickel. I'm a product solutions architect for NetApp. I've been working with NetApp for about 14 years now. With about half that time, I've been working in our cloud-based products. And I've been working with FSx for ONTAP really since its inception, right? Since it was an idea between AWS and NetApp, so I've been involved with it for a very long time. And I've been working with EVS as part of early access at the beginning of this year. And so today, I'm going to talk to you about how you can leverage FSx for ONTAP to help optimize the storage cost for your Amazon Elastic VMware deployments. So from agenda, from a very high level, we're going to start by, I just want to level set on what EVS is. This is a relatively new service, so what are the main functions and features of it. And then I'm going to kind of do a similar thing for FSx for ONTAP. I'm going to talk about what it is. Everybody's not always super familiar with it, and what are its main features and how do those features work with EVS, right? And what are the advantages of those features? And then how do those two services actually end up playing together as well? I also will then get into kind of like three main pillars, how you can lower the total cost of ownership, and a lot of that's around how you can decouple compute from storage. I'm going to talk about how you can improve your SLAs for trying to protect your VMs that are running in the EVS environment. And then I'll get into how you can operate on-prem and in cloud using the same ways and functions and ways that you've operated there. You're going to take that same thing and operate it in the cloud. And I'm going to show you how FSx ONTAP can help facilitate that. And so then I'm going to get to really one that I'm really excited about, a disaster recovery scenario that leverages FSx for ONTAP, and there's some new capabilities with FSx for ONTAP that makes that a very compelling use case for kind of helping you keep a minimum footprint for those types of scenarios. And then finally, I'm going to get into a tool called Workload Factory. This is a free tool. I'll probably mention that multiple times. And this is one that's going to help you plan and migrate your workloads from VMware and operate them in AWS with EVS and FSx ONTAP as the storage. So I'm going to start with the Elastic, Amazon Elastic VMware service. Talk about it at the highest levels, and you can think about it at the highest levels, right? It is just the fastest and easiest way to take your VMware environments and operate them efficiently and with the same way in the cloud. So what you're basically doing is you're taking, one of the main tenets for EVS when it was created is that we want to give you full control of the environment in the cloud. So however you're operating, with your VCF stack, right? You're basically taking that same VCF stack and you're taking it up to the cloud and operating it in a similar way. And so, that's when, and then once you get up into the cloud, then you have the access to Amazon services, which is another great advantage of EVS and a good way of getting a lot of stuff that's on-prem and getting into the cloud and get all of the advantages of the cloud. And then so it's about control and then also choice. How do you want to then handle that once you're up there? And that's the way you can either manage it all yourself or you can bring in a partner as well. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. So you can be customer managed, right? If you have all the technical expertise in-house, you know how to do migrations, you know how to maybe set up HCX, you know how to run your day-to-day adding ESXi hosts, right? All those types of things, and you're comfortable with that, and you have the technical know-how, great. You can do that all yourself. You don't need anybody else. But AWS has met with a lot of partners who say, hey, there's a lot of customers that maybe they need help migrating up, right? Or maybe they just need some help with automation, right? So there's partners that have been involved with EVS since it was early access as well. So it really is giving you that choice. Maybe you don't want to get a text in the middle of the night that there's a problem with this ESXi host, right? So partners can help manage, they can help you migrate, they can meet you wherever you are, whatever your needs are. So really the takeaway here, right, is that Amazon, right, has given you complete choice, right, in how you want to operate this VMware environment once you have it up and running in the cloud. One more step back, right, or down, I guess. This is showing, hey, what are we talking about here with EVS, right? You've got an on-premises system, and you've got your VCF stack, as I said before. You have your vSphere clients, you have your NSX manager, you've got your vSAN, right, and you've got all that on-prem. And so basically, you're taking that and you're moving it into the cloud, you're operating it exactly the same way. All those VCF components are also there in the cloud. And there's multiple reasons why you might be doing this, right? Maybe you're shutting down an existing data center, right? For that existing data center, you want to evacuate it, you're just migrating this all up in the cloud, and you just want to be there quick, and you have the expertise, and you want to operate it exactly the same way. It could be also that you're just extending your data center. Maybe you are running out of space. And maybe you're like, I'm not quite ready to go all the way into the cloud, right? I want to do dev test, so I can just move up some dev test workloads, get comfortable with the cloud, right, and then move from there. Maybe it's a disaster recovery. You got your on-prem and you don't want to set up a whole other data center just for disaster recovery, right? That's another option. Or maybe this is just your first step in, and I'm going to talk more about the disaster recovery because I think FSx for ONTAP is a really neat use case around that. And then maybe this is your first step of modernization, you bring up some apps, and then you start tying. And so the whole key here, right, the other whole half of this first picture is that you tie into all those Amazon services. Maybe you want to do the first step of modernization, take an app up into the cloud, and run Bedrock on it, right? So there's a plethora of Amazon services out there, right? And so you're taking that first step into getting access to all those services. So just one more step down, right, on what EVS is. The first thing is that it's an automated deployment, right? So it's really, really, really easy to use. It's really, really easy to get started with. So you can do it either through the console or the API, and you really don't have to provide a lot of information. You say, okay, I need to deploy it in a VPC, right? So you're going to supply a VPC. You need some ESXi hosts, so you're going to supply your EC2 instances. You're going to supply your licensing or your subscription, your VCF subscription, right? You're going to have to apply that, right, when you deploy it. And you have to set some sitter ranges. There's some, essentially, the EVS is taking the NSX networking and it's like kind of emulating it. So there's some private VLANs. You have to set up some sitters for that. Once you've defined all of that, then you click go. And in about 3 hours, you have a completely functional VCF stack running in the cloud. It's pretty amazing, really. And it's using, you see here, it's using Cloud Builder to do it, right? And so, again, once you're done, then you have an NSX manager. You have a vSphere client. You have a SCDC manager. And you have, and it says here, full control, right? You get, with AWS Secrets Manager, you get access to the username and the password for all those services. You can even get to the ESXi host, root ESXi host, right? So when we say full control, it really is full control when you come into the cloud. For right now, for the first pass right now, there's I4I metal instances is what's supported, right? There are plans to add other metal instances in the future. It will give you different price points, different performance, different storage footprints. So that is coming, but for right now, that's what it is I4I metal. And when you do that deployment right now, again, it's also VCF 5.2.1. There's obviously plans for VCF 9, so both of those things are going to be coming, but for right now, that's what you get. And you do have to supply your own licensing, right? So you have to supply your VCF subscription, and you got to make sure that the cores, that the VCF subscription that you have has enough cores for the 4-node minimum I4I metal deployment. So right now, it is a 4-node minimum. So again, right, you're bringing all this up. And when we talk about the consumption, that's, the consumption of your EC2 host is really what that's talking about there, right? Do you want to do on demand? Do you want to do 1 year? Do you want to do 3 year? Obviously, you do 3 year, your price will come down significantly, but, you just got to make sure you make that commitment or not. And then also, obviously, when you do this deployment, at the end of that deployment, everything's there. You've got access to everything. You do get vSAN storage, by default, right? The I4I metals come with some instance stores that become the vSAN, and so you have storage there with you, and that's actually where the VMs are deployed, right? The VMs are deployed, the SCDC manager and the vSphere client, all those things are deployed onto the vSAN. But you also then have the option of adding on FSx for ONTAP as additional storage. And that's where I'm going to spend most of my time. And so at the highest level here, right, I think a really critical thing here, right, is that Amazon FSx for ONTAP is the only AWS native storage service, right, that's been certified for Amazon EVS. So if you want to go native, right, with your storage on Amazon EVS, it's going to be FSx for ONTAP. And so now really, what is FSx for ONTAP? I'm going to spend a little bit of time here because it can sometimes be a little confusing for people because, it has ONTAP in the name and has NetApp in the name as well, right? But it is a fully managed AWS storage service. And it sits there next to S3, EBS, EFS, right? It falls there. It sits underneath the FSx, like the file system umbrella, right? But it is a fully managed AWS storage service. But what's unique about it? What is unique? Why did they bring it in? It's because it's able to bring enterprise-grade features to your storage in the cloud. And what do I mean by that? What kind of enterprise-grade features? Accessibility. We support both file, block, and object storage. And for, lots of times, I kind of always highlight block because we're under the file system, right? FSX file system, right? And people think of ONTAP. Lots of times people think of NFS and SMB, but we also support block. And about 30% of the deployments of FSX ONTAP are leveraging block. Lots of times for things like self-managed databases and those types of things. So we do block as well. Beyond block, we also support multi-protocol access. And what we mean by that is one set of data, right? You can access it with NFS and SMB, and lots of times customers have those requirements right on-prem as well, right? And also S3, and I'd be remiss if I didn't really call that one out because that was just announced right this week at the keynote, right? That FSX for ONTAP can be an endpoint to all these different now AWS services that leverage S3, like Bedrock, Redshift, right? All of those now. So now you can have one set of data and do like AI type of stuff on that same set of data. Now, that's not what this talk is about, but I just want to make sure I highlighted, right, that new announcement just came out. So then resiliency and protection, high availability. Essentially, there's 2 nodes for an FSX for ONTAP system, and they're replicating data back and forth, and so that your data is always available when you need it. And really, the superpower of ONTAP, right, is snapshots, so that you always have a local copy of your data. And why do I say superpower? Because they are pointer-based, they are instantaneous, they only do deltas, and they're really the bedrock, to use the AI term, they're the bedrock of what ONTAP has been built on for 30 years, and we're taking that same type of really enterprise-grade storage functionality. A lot of the other functionality that's in ONTAP is based on snapshots as well. So, and I'll show you later on why that's important as well for this particular deployment, for use with EVS and FSX ONTAP. Data security. This one's always super important in the cloud. FSX for ONTAP is secure from the bottom up, right? If you start at the bottom of the stack, data at rest is encrypted with KMS or a customer KMS key. If you go up a level from that stack, we can do data in transit. We can encrypt with SMB encryption, NFS with Kerberos. We also support IPsec, right? Then we also integrate with Active Directory, so you have only the right people can talk to the files, right, for SMB and NFS. And then beyond that even, right, then we also have immutable storage options. What I mean by that is that you can say, hey, once this data has been written, it cannot be deleted for a certain number of time. And we support compliance immutable storage, which means nobody can change it, not even AWS. If you call into a support ticket and you've put a lock on that data for some certain period of time, not even AWS administrators can delete it. So it really is that level of protection. And then one step on top of that even is the malware protection. There's a feature called autonomous ransomware protection that's built into the storage layer. There's no external client that does this, that looks for entropy changes or looks for file extension changes. And when it does that, it takes one of those immutable snapshots instantaneously so you can make sure you stop and interact. And not only is it taking that snapshot with the version that's coming out really soon, it's actually taking us a couple snapshots right before that as well so that you can go back in time before that you even noticed that the attack was happening. So again, we're giving you that kind of capability with these enterprise grade. Here's a big one, right? Always important, price and performance. Data footprint reduction. FSX for ONTAP supports deduplication, compaction, compression, right? Those are very important things to keep that storage footprint, right, to a minimal amount. It also supports data tiering, where essentially data tiering is, we have an SSD layer in FSX ONTAP, but if we notice that there are blocks that are cold, then it will tier those blocks off into the capacity tier. And so that can also help reduce your overall cost for running that storage. And this can also, it'll come up again when we look at the disaster recovery scenario. And then finally, we can easily replicate the data using SnapMirror, which is again a snapshot-based thing, to other regions. And we also support a feature called Flex Clones. Flex Clones are really important because they are, again, they're leveraging snapshots. So that you can create an instant copy of your data. And then, and since we're pointer-based, any new writes are the only thing that are saved, right? So it makes it a very way inefficient. And I'll point to later how that can play in some of the VMware flows later. Okay, so that's the FSX for ONTAP. So now I said, okay, we got FSx for ONTAP and we have EVS. How do these two services play together? Well, we have two options, right? One is a data store, a supplemental data store. And for that, as I said before, right, we support multiple protocols. So we support NFS data stores, and we support iSCSI data stores, and also for Block now, we support NVMe data stores, right? So it's really whichever one you're more comfortable with, right? If you've been using NFS data stores on-prem, use it the same way in the cloud. If you've been using Block and you're familiar with that, then bring Block into the cloud, right? So both of those, you have the options of whatever data store you want. The other thing, right, that we do, if you're not talking about an external data store itself, is that we can be guest attached storage. So just essentially, maybe you have some type of shared storage requirement, right? And multiple VMs need to access that data, right? And so we can be guest mounts, and we support NFS and SMB as guest mounts to your VMs that are running inside of EVS. So a little bit of an architectural picture. I won't super deep dive, but just at the highest level, right? If you look at this picture, what do you see? You see that the EVS deployment, right, has an overlay network that's kind of shown there. It's deployed into your VPC, the customer VPC, right? There's no shadow VPC. It goes right in there. And what else is deployed into that exact same VPC? FSx for ONTAP. Now, you see there's a couple of like ENIs there. That's just the way FSx for ONTAP plugs into any, it's a managed service. That's just the way it plugs in anytime you're going to deploy FSx for ONTAP. So the way then to connect this up as a data store is you set up a NFS, for example, an NFS file server, right, on your FSx for ONTAP system. You go into the vSphere client that was deployed, and you go through the steps to say, set up a data store. All you do is choose the IP address of the NFS server that you set up on FSx for ONTAP. Like I wrote the guide for how to set this up. It was boring, right? I didn't have anything to write. I was like, do what you've always done, right? It's the exact same steps. The only thing, oh yeah, by the way, we do connect up with an ENI, and you got to update the security group on that ENI to make sure that the NFS ports are open. That's it. That's the only unique thing I had to do. Other than that, it's the same way you set up a data store, right? So then my takeaway from this is like you set up an NFS server and you connect it the same way that you've always done it. So very, very simple to hook up. Oh, and one other thing I forgot to mention is that, so I have it shown here, right, in the same VPC. You obviously don't have to put your FSx for ONTAP system in the same VPC, right, as your EVS. You could put it into a separate VPC and do like VPC peering. Technically, you could do Transit Gateway, but I would not recommend Transit Gateway for a data store in general. So that's one option, right? The second option was the other one that I mentioned, guest attached storage, right? And for that, it's similar, right? You still have the ENI, you still can be deployed in the same VPC, but we're attaching to the VMs themselves that are running inside your EVS like overlay network, right? So you have your VMs that are up and running there, and you're going to mount those VMs. Now, the other thing that's slightly different here, right? Before with the data stores, we're coming directly from the ESXi host. With a guest mount, there is a virtual router, and it's shown in the picture here as like an NSX edge router, right? And so essentially, the data does have to be moved right between the kind of overlay network to the underlay network. But the nice thing is that when you do that deployment, Amazon, right, as part of that cloud builder, it does all of that for you, right? And if you go into your NSX and you want to add a new network segment, there's BGP on that virtual router. It's going to automatically update your AWS route tables to be able to get to that. So it makes it super, super easy to do. Not a lot of, hey, here's the special things that I have to do to make this work. And again, the only thing you have to do is make sure that you have your ports open. If you want to set up NFS, you log into your VM and you do mount. Nothing more than mount, right? As long as those ports are open, you got it up and running. Now, here's the other important thing I want to say here is, right, remember we talked about multi-protocol, right? This is this scenario where lots of customers, if they have multi-protocol requirements, right, this is where they might want to set up some shared data store, and you can have that one set of data. Your VM that's in EVS can access that data, and your SMB, Windows client can also access that same data, right? So it's really giving you complete control there. So now we're going to get into some of this cost optimization. We're going to talk about several ways, right, that the FSx ONTAP can help with some different areas of operating your environment. One is cost optimization. And it's basically the ability to decouple compute and storage, because for the ESXi hosts, right, they're deployed right now with the i4 iMetal, you get storage and compute together. And so we're going to help decouple that to reduce your overall cost. Next is if you need to do VM backups, right? We can help you improve the performance and reliability of doing those backups, making sure that you're meeting your SLAs. And then finally, improve operational excellence, like take everything that you've been doing on-prem and replicate that the same way and doing it in the cloud. So we're going to start with lowering the total cost of ownership. One of the things about FSx for ONTAP is it's very flexible. And so there's multiple storage types and performance options. So let's just say that you were setting up your data store, and at some point, you had some VMs that are running there, but all of a sudden you need to add some more VMs that have a higher performance need. You can simply change the throughput on your FSx for ONTAP system. And as I said before, it's an HA pair, right? So it's an active passive. And so if you want to change the SKU and add more performance to your storage, it does it non-destructively because it does automatic failovers. So you never lose access to your data while you're doing those. And so you can scale up and scale down your performance needs as you need them, right? You can scale up your IOPS that are needed for it, right? So it really gives you that full ability to handle whatever you need at the time that you need it. Another one is the built-in storage efficiencies. This one cannot be overlooked. Obviously, I said before, the deduplication, the compression, and compaction. With VDI workloads and deduplication, we can save up to like 70% on your footprint, right? So that can be a significant cost savings. So definitely, those built-in storage efficiencies are very important. And finally, we can decouple the storage from compute. I've got a few slides that kind of animate and show this in action. So for a storage scaling example, this is the 4-node minimum I was talking about before, right? For I4I metals, you're getting 30 TB of storage. All that's not usable, but 30 TB of storage per ESXi host, 64 CPUs. And you're running along just fine, right? You're happy with everything. And then you know what? I need a little bit more storage, right? I need 40 TB more of storage. So what's the solution, right? If you're just having that tightly coupled, hyper-converged CPU and storage coming in together, you'd have to add 2 more ESXi hosts. 2 more I4I metal just to get that 40 TB more of storage. So that's unnecessary compute cost, right? You didn't really need that extra compute. So what we can do is bring in the 40 TB on a supplemental data store from FSx for ONTAP. And not only are we bringing in the 40 TB, right, we're also doing dedupe, compression, all those types of storage efficiency features. So maybe you don't even need 40 TB, right? So it just depends on your workload and your use case. So what I want to show here with this graph, right, is essentially, right, that advantage that we bring in, right, as your storage and your EVS environment grows, right, that's going to grow more and more, right? So you're going to get more and more value out of scaling those things independently. Now, obviously, this chart is built in with some assumptions about how much how much storage I need for how much compute. But you can see, as you really grow, you're going to save up in the millions of dollars. The other kind of important thing on this particular slide is that what we're showing for that cost is just the cost by not adding unnecessary ESXi host. But by not adding unnecessary ESXi hosts, you're also reducing your core count. The VCF subscriptions are tied to core count. So we don't know what those numbers are because they're different for every customer, but you're actually also saving on your subscription at the same time. So it can be very powerful. All right, so that's that decoupling compute storage, pretty straightforward story, right? And obviously this is going to change, right, as they add more types of nodes when different things make sense. But beyond that, right, you've got to back up your VMs. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of compare how you back up VMs and EVS on vSAN, and then how it would work if you're leveraging FSx for ONTAP. So here's a backup, right? You have a vSAN, you have a current image, you have a VM, and you want to do a backup of that VM. So you need to bring in some type of external backup service to do the backup. And so what that's going to do is it's going to take a VMware snapshot, right? And then that VMware snapshot has to be transferred. Now, when you think about this is putting a load on your ESXi host, right? Having to do this work. So you got to think about, are these big VMs? Can I do this in a certain SLA, in a certain window, right? When I'm off of production, key hours, right? So you got to just keep all of those things in mind. And then, so this can be a slow backup process. It depends on the size, depends on what all you have set up there. But to me, the other important part here is that there's a VMware snapshot that's taken. That's to have a VM consistent image, right? The existence of that VM consistent image, right, has a performance penalty. And that's because as future writes come in, it has to keep track of the delta with the current snapshot. that has been shown to have a performance impact. There's blogs out there about it, right? And a lot of the things that try to correct it are basically by removing snapshots. So then are you messing with your SLA? So you have to keep that in mind. So, it's more of a management difficulty. You have another backup service. You got to make sure that, it's not affecting your ESXi workloads. And so you're just adding a bit of complexity to your overall backup process. Now let's compare that with doing your backups if you're running your data stores on FSx for ONTAP instead of on vSAN. So we still have this current image, right? The main thing is we're going to set up a separate FSx for ONTAP system just to house the backups. Now, the good thing about this separate system is that we can scale it down, right? We don't need a large throughput on it, right? So you'll pay less for throughput. We're going to put a pretty minimal SSD tier, like 5% of the data will be sitting on the object tier. And then you basically are going to be doing where you're going to still take that VMware snapshot, and that's if you need a VM consistent image. Not on-prem, I've talked to multiple people that say, on-prem, lots of times, we just need crash consistent. We don't even need a VM consistent image. But for this exercise, right, it depends on the application, right? But for this exercise, we're going to say, hey, okay, we're doing the same thing, right? We're going to take a VMware snapshot. Then we leverage that, that superpower of ONTAP was that instantaneous snapshot. And that just happens instantaneously. And once you've done that, here's the key, is that you can remove that VMware snapshot, right? So now you're no longer going to be having that performance penalty. Now we also use that other technology, SnapMirror, which is snapshot-based, and it keeps that data deduped and compressed in transit. So you're able to move the data and do the backups faster by leveraging that same thing. The other main thing to look at this picture, is this affecting your ESXi host? No. It's at the storage layer, right? It's doing this replication at the storage layer. So you're offloading that to the storage layer and not affecting your ESXi host. That's another big advantage. So, so this is giving you that faster backup process. That snapshot the VMware snapshot was deleted instantaneously, so that's zero performance impact. And then minimal storage overhead because we have the data deduped and compressed, and we also move it deduped and compressed. So that's the comparison of those two. Now let's look at how we can operate the same way on premises as we do in the cloud. And so for this particular scenario, this is obviously talking about having ONTAP on-prem, right? So we have ONTAP on-prem and we have a data store. Well, so when we set up our EVS environment, we can set up that data store the same way. And it's just giving you consistency. So having that consistency, right, helps with discovery and planning, right? Say, hey, however I'm setting this up in here, whatever tools I'm using, whatever automation, whatever maybe playbooks I have for setting up my data stores and managing those, I can do that the exact same way in the cloud. Avoid rewriting applications because this is the EVS, right? You can take an exact image. It could be a very old image, right? It might not be one that's supported anymore, right? And so you don't have to rewrite anything. You bring it up into the cloud. You operate it in exactly the same way. And then you have a simple and safe migration. Again, that same SnapMirror I just talked about, right? You're going to move the data dedupe and compress. A very easy way. You take your data store on-prem, you just SnapMirror it up to the cloud. And so you're really getting the full interoperability, right? All those NSX managers, vSphere clients, if you had any plugins into your vSphere client, right, you can bring those up as well. So you really are operating the same way. If you had any automations, those work the same way. Your playbooks all work the same way. But we're also preserving enterprise-grade capabilities. Things like, I mentioned Flex clones before. So NetApp has a technology, or along with VMware, called VAAI, which offloads certain actions to the storage layer. To help you operate faster. And one of those is if you create a VM from a template, you can leverage NetApp's Flex clone technology, right, was that instantaneous copy only storing the Delta blocks, and so you can spin up VMs much faster with much less overhead by leveraging that technology as well. Also, maybe you had SnapBlock, right? Maybe you had that on-prem and you want to take that same level of protection into the cloud. So you're getting that consistent operational experience on both sides. All right, so now this gets us to one that I'm really excited about, a disaster recovery scenario that we have with FSx for ONTAP in this type of environment. Now again, this is talking about ONTAP to ONTAP, right? You have something on-prem, a data center running that's running on vSphere, and you want to set up a disaster recovery in the cloud. So what you can do is set a minimal EVS cluster, right, that's deployed, and you would also keep a minimal FSx for ONTAP footprint. So when you're doing this, right, you're going to replicate data up, and most of that data is going to be going into the capacity tier. You're going to have a very thin SSD tier, and you're going to have just those 4 ESXi hosts, kind of like a pilot light, right? But right now, the 4 ESXi host is like the minimum. And that's tied to VCF 5.2.1. So that could change in the future, but right now that's the minimum. So we really have a really minimal footprint. Most of the data is going into the object tier, and we only have 4 ESXi hosts. So now what happens is, hey, a disaster occurs. What you can then do is expand the number. Like now I'm going to go production on this side, right? I'm going to need some more compute, right? So I'm going to add 4 additional ESXi hosts. So I'm going to scale up the ESXi, and what I'm also going to do is scale up the storage. I'm going to change the throughput on the FSX for ONTAP system from maybe a 512 or 128, and I'm going to put it to a 1 gig or a 2 gig SKU, right? And so you're going to meet the production workload, but you weren't paying for that the whole time, right? That's really the beauty of this, is you only bring it up as you need. Now, obviously, with this type of scenario, you have to figure out what are your SLAs, right? Does this fit within your company's SLAs, right? To have, because it will take some time, right, to bring up additional ESXi hosts, right? It will take some time to change the throughput. It's only like 30 some minutes, right, of your FSX for ONTAP system. But there is an impact there. So you just got to take all of that into account. And here's the other nice thing, right, is that, okay, we failed over, we're operating in the cloud, and now we've corrected things, and now we want to go back to where we were before. So you start replicating your data back, all this, and using that snap mirror technology, dedupe and compress the data, very minimal footprint coming back when you do the replication back. Then you scale down that EVS cluster. You no longer need 8 ESXi hosts, right? So you can scale that back down to the minimum. And here's the really cool thing, is that this was a feature that's been asked about for a long time for FSX for ONTAP, and that was the ability to do SSD shrink, or I think it's called SSD decrease. But now, once you've done that, you have to at first evacuate that data up into the capacity tier, but once the data has been moved to the capacity tier, you can then shrink down that SSD so this is not being used anymore and really keep that minimum footprint. Then you reestablish your original snap mirror relationship, and you're back to this very low level, right? Had just what you need available for you at the time. Obviously, disaster recovery can be more complex than what it was right in that slide. There's a lot to do to actually fail over, right? Complete working environments on vSphere environment from one to the other. So NetApp has a tool called NetApp Disaster Recovery that helps you plan and manage and automate that. And so it's not only doing the storage, it's doing the storage with SnapMirror. And this is a tool only for ONTAP to ONTAP. And so, but it's also failing over storage, compute, and networking all together, right? And it has plans for doing that. The other really cool feature that it has the ability to do DR testing. And when it does the DR testing, what it does is it leverages that same flex clone technology, where when you fail over, it takes a flex clone and all the new data is being written on the flex clone. And again, it was an instantaneous copy of your data, and only new deltas are being written. Once that DR test is over, you just delete the flex clone and you're back to exactly where you were before. So this is a tool that was built for this, and since it's ONTAP to ONTAP, it's offered at a very competitive price point. A lot of these tools will charge per VM. This charges per storage, and it charges it at a very reasonable rate. And it saves you typically around 80% compared to other disaster recovery tools that are out there in the market. If you're interested in it, just look up NetApp Disaster Recovery, and there's a 30-day free trial as well. Okay, so now switching gears just a little bit, I'm going to hop over to Workload Factory. So Workload Factory is a tool that was developed with kind of, AWS and NetApp together came up with this plan for how do we want to set up a tool that will allow you to optimize and use storage best practices across multiple workloads where FSX ONTAP is being used, right? And so this tool works for SQL workloads, Oracle workloads, AI, right? It does a plethora of different things, and it does it from planning to making sure you stay well architected across those different workloads, because things drift over time. But in this particular case, right, we're talking about what it's currently doing for VMware workloads. And for what it's doing right now, it basically has some planning stuff, and it has this TCO calculator, which I'm going to show in a minute. And it has a way to make sure that when you deploy your data stores, they're going to be leveraged by EVS, that it does it with the optimal configurations. So I'm going to start with the TCO calculator. And for this TCO calculator, basically, it's just a really easy tool. It's really convenient and nice to use that will show you, different, estimate the total cost of ownership with different deployment scenarios that you can put in there and identify cost optimizations. I mean, obviously, all this data could be figured out by the AWS tools as well, right? AWS has pricing calculators, but it gets a bit complex, and this is a really easy UI that can show it to you very quickly. So I have a little demo on this one. So at the very top here, we have console.workloads.napp.com. Anybody can go here. It's free, right? And then you go into Explore Savings. And so at this point, what you're going to basically be doing is putting into the tool, hey, what am I looking at my EVS deployment to be, right? How much CPUs do I need? What's my memory footprint? What's my storage? And we give you these really convenient sliders, right, to move that information back and forth. And as you're doing that over on the right-hand side, right, you can see what's my total cost going to be? What's my total cost for just doing EVS with this particular configuration, or EVS plus FSx for ONTAP? Like, how can we potentially save you money there? And obviously it's going to change depending on your footprints. And then also what we're saying is that this is the 1 year, 3 year, or on demand for the cost of those I4I metal. Now obviously, as more different instance types comes out, we'll be adjusting this. Then it's going to show you, hey, this is what my FSx for ONTAP deployment is. This is what we expect to save from a data efficiency standpoint. And then this is the exact cost that you pay for the FSx for ONTAP system. What's also really nice, right, is going to show you that cost, is that over on the right, it shows you, hey, here are how many I4I instances I need to match those parameters. But how many do I need that were just for storage, right? And so it's going to easily show you, hey, I needed some of these ESXi hosts just for storage. And it's also going to lay out all of the costs, because there are multiple cost components to EVS. There's there's a VPC, the EVS control plane, right, that you also had to pay for. You also had to pay for the route server. So there's a few other. They're not the major components. The I4I metal, right, is the main one, but there are some other components. So it's going to take all of that stuff into account and give you that total cost of ownership and say, does it make sense to add FSx ONTAP, or does it not make sense? And that's just purely from a pure cost perspective. So that's the calculator. Again, well, you can definitely log into it. I'll show a QR code in just a minute. The other main tool that we have right now is, once you determine, hey, I want to use FSx for ONTAP, here's what I was kind of planning to do for it. Now I want to actually do the deployment of it. So it's going to deploy your FSx for ONTAP system. It's going to deploy the data stores. It's going to set them up with best practices. You can actually even tie it into your EVS environment and have it set, like if you're doing NFS, for example, and that's what this one supports currently. It might add others later. For right now, it'll set the right timing values. It'll set in-connect values, right? So it's going to do everything for best practices. And so this is the QR code. Feel free to take a picture of this, and this will take you to that calculator. It's 100% free, as I said before. Log in there. And actually, at the very top of that calculator is a little email that me and a couple other people from my team will get. So if you start to use it and you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. So the key takeaways today, right, is that this is bringing control and consistency. Like when you bring your EVS environment in here, you are getting complete control of your VCF environment, right? And if you're leveraging FSx for ONTAP, right, you're having that same consistency. If you're using ONTAP on-prem, you're getting that same way in the cloud. We're bringing all those enterprise-grade capabilities, the deduplication, compression, the ability to do snapshots, the ability to do autonomous ransomware protection, right? All of those types of capabilities are also being brought into the cloud. And then, of course, what people really care about, cost savings, right? So we're able to decouple that compute and storage, as well as apply all of those efficiencies, and that's going to really help you keep your cost to as low as possible for your EVS deployments. And with that, I'll say thank you. Please complete that session survey in the mobile app. And I'll stay around here for any questions. I'll just be right down here. Be happy to talk with anybody about anything around this topic. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.